this is the last thing I'm going to show off from my Shades of Magic box set that I got at Christmas. I've already shown you guys a lot of it because I'm so proud of it and I'm so happy about it. But this is just a poster that came inside of it. It's pretty cool. I don't think I'll put it up because I don't have a good frame for it, but maybe one day. And on the back here, it's got the maps of the 4 Londons. Pretty sweet. But yeah, the box set that I got for Christmas has just been my pride and joy. And it's seen me through a reread of the Shades of Magic trilogy, which is what we're here to talk about today. I first read this trilogy back in like 2018, 2019. And the first time I read it, it was on audiobook. So completely on audiobook, no physical copies. And I liked it. I read the whole thing. Not all at once. I think I skipped around a little bit, but I read the whole thing and I liked it. I gave the books like around 3 or 4 stars, which is pretty good for me. I don't really like writing things on a star system because it's not nuanced enough. I guess it doesn't get the details in there. But this series always stuck in the back of my mind, and I knew that I wanted to do a physical reread of it at some point. And then I saw this box set of it. I got them set out here, but I saw this box set of it at my local bookstore, E.V. Shavers, back in like October. It was sitting there for a while, teasing me. And I just knew that I had to have it. I had to have it, and that was how I was going to do my physical reread, and and so I made that happen at Christmas, and I did my physical reread, and the second time around, I love the series even more. Like, I don't know how I gave it a 3 stars, or I think I gave the first book 3 stars, the first time I read it, but I don't even know how that's possible because it blew my mind the second time, and I love it so much. So today, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Shades of Magic trilogy by E.V. Schwab. Bam. Shades of Magic by E.V. Schwab. That's what we're here to talk about today. So, during this first section, I want to go over the first book, A Darker Shade of Magic. And that's going to be a spoiler-free review for The Darker Shade of Magic, the opener to this trilogy. And then I'll do a spoiler-free for the trilogy as a whole. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then on the back half of the video, I want to get into spoiler territory for the whole trilogy. Just some thoughts I have about why I love it so much, what a great progression it makes, and why I think it's the perfect gateway series for people that are looking to get into adult fantasy, or just fantasy in general. So, let's get started. Kel wore a very peculiar coat. It had neither one side, which would be conventional, nor 2, which would be unexpected, but several, which was, of course, impossible. That's the opening line to A Darker Shade of Magic by E.V. Schwab, Chapter 1, Line 1. And my understanding from an interview that I think I read or watched of E.V. Schwab is that was her original concept. That was her first idea for this entire series. The thing that spawned the whole world, the whole trilogy, was this idea of a young man with a weird magical coat. There was not one coat, but many that he could turn inside out to have different styles, and just a coat of many colors, if you would. She said that was what started this whole thing, and so it's very appropriate that is the very first line in the trilogy. What is so great about this book, this first book, is that I read it back in 2018, and back then I wasn't as much of a fantasy reader. Like, I was sort of a casual fantasy reader, mostly young adult fantasy, because I was more of a young adult then, but I was hesitant to dip my toe into like epic fantasy or epic adult fantasy, because I was just intimidated. I was intimidated by the size of the books. I was intimidated by the whole Tolkien legacy culture, and I was of course intimidated by the fandoms, which can sometimes be exclusion. they can be a little haughty, I guess you could say. Very protective of their fantasy, their classic fantasy that they love. But I've since found that that's a small part of the community, and there's a lot of us out there on BookTube especially, I found so many people that I love watching on there who are not like that and who love fantasy the way I do, and who are excited and looking for new and different kinds of fantasy, like a new definition. Because fantasy, there's so much encapsulated in that word, and there's can be so much encapsulated in that genre. It doesn't just have to be Tolkien. It doesn't just have to be elves and dwarves. This is fantasy for people that don't know they love fantasy yet. So you know, yes, it's still Western, so it still takes place in a very they have Londons, so it's obviously Europe. But it's not so much medieval Europe. It's more so like Victorian era Europe, or like right before that. And the whole premise of this book is there are multiple dimensions, multiple worlds, and in each world, the one thing they all have in common is that there is a city on a river off the Atlantic Ocean, and it's called London in every city, in every world. In the same place in every world, there is a city called London. And all these Londons, all these worlds, they're very different, and they all have a very different relationship to magic. So there is, I can use my handy dandy map here. There is Black London, where magic came and it ate up everything. It ate up everything and sort of burned through the world. Because magic is just this pure source of power, and it's not naturally, you know, disruptive or positive or negative, but left unchecked, it can be destructive. And then there's Red London, which is where Kell, our main protagonist, is from, and it's a world that has flourished with magic. So it's a world where everyone, well, most people, have magic and have access to it, and it's totally shaped the world, the way the world works, the way their politics work. So it's a world that is just flush and full and vibrant with magic, sort of the best case scenario. There's Grey London, which is most like our world. I like to think that this is our world. It's 18th century London. King George the Fourth. Is it George? Yeah, King George the Fourth is king. So it's very much so our London, our sort of timeline, if you will. And then there is White London. I think I'm pointing at the wrong ones. This is Grey London. This is White London. Yeah, and White London, very much like Black London, has sort of been consumed by its, not by magic, but by its desire for magic. So they're sort of starved off, and they become very desperate and very cruel, and it's just a very frightening, stark, desperate place. And all these worlds are kept separate because of what happened to Black London. And Kell is one of the only people in the universe, multiverse, that can travel between the worlds. So he actually works for the king and queen, the monarchy of Red London, who are also his adopted parents. He works for them as a messenger to these other Londons that keep in contact with each other, even though they can never really interact too much other than just passing information. So Kell is sort of the main protagonist, but you also have Delilah Bard. She shares a perspective in this book, and she is from Grey London. So she's from our world, a world without magic, a world that doesn't even remember that magic exists. And she's a thief, like a street rat sort of deal, but she longs for adventure, longs for just to get out of London and get out of her situation, her circumstances, and she longs for adventure and danger, and she doesn't know it yet, but magic. She longs for magic. And what I love, and like I said, this is a fantasy book for people that don't know they love fantasy yet. So it's just very, and I felt this way about it when I first read it too, is that it draws you in and it says, you can love this. You can love this sort of stuff, and this stuff can be cool and it can be different. It's not what you think. It's not what you think, and I think Evie Schwab, she does this with all her series, where she just goes out of the box and she takes a genre and she says, okay, I can do whatever I want with this, and I can make this whatever I want. And that's very much so what she did with the Shades of Magic trilogy. The magical systems in this trilogy, so it's sort of broken into like 3 different parts. So you have elemental magic is the main thing that you're going to see. So they use water, air, earth, and fire. And in Red London, most people have access to those abilities and have an affinity for one element or another. Very Avatar-esque in that way. And they use it for fighting in that way as well. And then Kel is what they call an Antari, and he's a very special sort of magician that can use blood magic, or I like to call it multidimensional magic. So only through the use of blood magic, which very few people can use in this multiverse, can you travel between the worlds, between the Londons, and just between space in general. So he can travel, he can teleport, essentially, is his big mutant powers. He can teleport, whether it be between Londons, between worlds, or just within a world. So there's elemental, multidimensional, or blood magic. And in this world that E.V. Schwab built, those are both what I would describe as hard magic systems. I'm not an expert. I'm still learning about the definitions of these things. But I would call those hard magic systems. They have very laid out rules for how those things work, and how those kinds of magic can be used and who they can be used by. But then you also have sort of, and this comes up more so in later books, but like spell casting that is a little more vague. So it's not elemental in nature necessarily, but it's not like Kel's magic either. So in Red London, they have priests that study magic, and they seem to be able to cast all kinds of spells to like do what you would typically think magic could do, like to create things, right? Or to like cast spells on people to like put them to sleep, or to dress them up, or to make things fly. Like, so that's a little bit softer. You have the elemental side of it, which is very defined and hard magic, and then you have the multi-dimensional magic, the Antari magic, which I feel is very hardly defined as well. Lots of rules, only certain people can use it, and it has to be used in this way, commanded usually with blood spells or words. And then you have this other sort of side of it that I don't have a very clear picture of, that's like spell casting. But I'm not really sure where that magical ability is coming from, or how they're casting it when their main form of magic is elemental. So I'm going to call that a soft magic system over here. So lots of magic. This darker shades of magic. You got shades of magic coming out of the wazoo, right? What I love so much about these books, though, is the characters. The world is fantastic, and I am totally high on the world, and I want so much more of it, so much more, especially from Red London in particular. I could totally do away with the other Londons entirely and just focus on Red London, and I think it's still such a rich, fantastical world to draw on and to learn about. So I'm excited to see E.V. Schwab dig more into it, because she's supposed to be going back there and just showing us more. Just give me more. What I really love is the characters in these books. Kel, Delilah, Rye is Kel's brother. He's a prince, and I love him with all of my heart. So I just wanted to read a little something. Delilah says, "I'm not going to die," she said. "Not till I've seen it." Seen what? Her smile widened. Everything. Delilah is so relatable, you guys. Like, Delilah is me. She just, her desire and her thirst for adventure is borderline, like, desperate. I don't know that she would have made it. Okay, that's getting into spoiler territory. But I love her so much. And the things she says and the way she thinks and what she's willing to sacrifice just to be a part of the world is just incredible to me. I love her. I love her so much. But yeah, so these characters, it's not just that there's great character work in this trilogy, it's that there's great relationships between the characters as well. So Kel and Rye are brothers, and they're both technically princes, because Rye's family, the king and queen, adopted Kel when he was a young child, and so they were raised up together, and people referred to Kel as a prince, so he could never take the throne, I don't think, but he is very much so a part of the royal family, even though he doesn't always feel that way. And their relationship is, it's so good. They love each other so much, and they're very much so like the most important person in each other's lives, in each other's worlds. And there's nothing that they wouldn't do for each other. And I am a sucker. I'm a sucker for relationships like that, especially non-romantic ones. Because like when it's like a romantic relationship where you would do anything for each other, or like you're each other's entire world, then it feels unhealthy. And I'm not saying that that's not unhealthy in other circumstances that are non-romantic or platonic, but their relationship feels so pure. It's just made of like love and brotherly connection, and I love them. I love them so much. And then another relationship that I love, of course, is Kel and Lila. I like to call them the opposites because they are so different, but they bring out the best in each other. Like Lila makes Kel brave, and she makes him clever, and Kel makes Lila care, you know, and that's what she needs more than anything, is to care. And so I just think they complement each other so well, and they make each other stronger, and I love that. And then, of course, there's Alucard and Rye. I don't want to say too much about them, but they're my favorite. I love them. I love them so much. And then Alucard and Lila, there are just so many connections. Oh, it's so good. Alucard and Lila are just like partners in crimes, pirates in crimes. They fit so well together, and I feel like Alucard is what Lila wants to be, or what she thinks she wants to be. She wants to be that suave and that cool and that powerful and that free. Or the sort of freedom she thinks he has when they first meet. But yeah, so you just have, just to sum up like what you're getting into when you get into this trilogy and get into these books, is you're getting into multi-dimensional stuff, you're getting into magic, elemental magic, you're getting into pirates and princes, and there's queer rep, male-on-male romance is in here. You have a heterosexual romance too. There are only two romances, heterosexual romance, and then you have a male-male romance, that are both given, I'm not going to say equal amount of attention, but they're both given their due, for sure. And I think anyone that reads this series is going to love both of them and feel that they both were done justice, or at least that's how I feel. But yeah, there are pirates, there are thieves, and then in the second book, there is a tournament style, a magical tournament gladiator sort of deal that I love. So let's just go right ahead and move into the spoilery section of this. So spoilers. Get out of here if you don't want to know spoilers for book 1, book 2, and book 3, okay? A Gathering of Shadows. You guys, this was my favorite one the first time I read it through. And during my second reread, like looking at the story as a whole, it was hard for me to pick a favorite book because I read them back to back to back. And I think that is definitely the best way to read them if you can. Because the story works so well just going all together, just as one story. And they do, even though there is a little bit of a time jump between book 1 and book 2, they do run into each other pretty well. But book 2, the whole Essentosh thing was just right up my alley. A magical duel tournament between, you know, magicians that have like basically celebrity status in this world. Oh, it's fantastic. I love it. I love it so much. I would love to see E.B. Schwab do a story, or even just like a short story, a novella or something, in this world, about like past Essentoshes. In this edition that I have, there are short stories in the back that she's written in this world. They're pretty short, like 5 or 6 pages or something. Just little peeks. And I would just want so much more. Like, one of them has, I forget what her name is, but the previous winner of the Essentosh, the woman, there's a short story about her in the back of this one, and I want a whole book about her. Give me all of it. She's queer, bisexual, I think, or maybe just lesbian, I'm not sure, but it's so good. The short story was so good, and I just want more of her. I want a whole book about her. I love that element of it, and maybe this is my favorite book, I'm not sure. I love the Essentosh deal, but I don't like how far apart Lila and Kel are throughout this whole book, because like they're hiding, or Lila's hiding from Kel more accurately, but they don't get to interact nearly enough for me, and I'm missing a little bit of that. And then of course Alucard and Rye they're sort of on the outs in this book, and I like them much better in A Conjuring of Light when they're in their making up stage. So, but you know, this trilogy has something for everyone. It goes through all the stages, because something I really love about A Conjuring of Light is all the sailing and like piratey stuff, because a good chunk of the third book takes place on the ocean, on a pirate ship, because they have to go on a quest. Of course they do, a quest. So yeah, I really like the piratey elements, and just throwing like basically the whole Scooby Gang except for Rye on a boat together and forcing them to be cooperative is good shit. That's what I'll say. And what else? I guess it's hard to talk about this trilogy as a whole without talking about Holland, who is in some ways the villain and in some ways the unsuspecting hero of this trilogy. I know some people really, really love Holland, and he's like their whole reason for loving this trilogy, and I can see that. He has perhaps the best character arc in the whole thing, the best arc. But the chunk of his arc is in book 3. So it's not that he doesn't develop as a character in the first 2 books. It's just that in the first book he's the villain and we don't get to know him very well. In the second book, he's like in White London for most of the time. He's in White London on the throne, and we're not even seeing it from his perspective. We're seeing it from what's her name? I don't know, his little protege's perspective. I can't remember her name. And so it's not until this book when we get Holland's perspective and we get Holland just being dragged around essentially, and not, you know, having much agency of his own. And this is when we see the real Holland come out, and it's golden, no doubt. It is golden, but it's not the thing that I love most about this series. I love his arc. I love how he comes out of it all and where him and Kel end up, but it's not my favorite part. My favorite part is everything else. Everything else. It's Rye and Kel, and it's Rye and Alucard, and it's Lila and learning to care, or being forced to care, however you want to phrase that. I love characters that think they don't it, and then over the course of the series, and then they wake up at some point, usually in the final book, and they're like, oh shit, I care. And this is the worst. And caring is the worst thing that has like ever happened to them. Those are the characters that I love. That series up there, the Wolves of Mercy Falls by Maggie Shiver, it's like that. It has a character like that. Cole, he learns to care, and he hates it. He hates it more than anything. And I feel like her character, Ronan, probably in the Raven cycle, is also a little reminiscent of that. And they all sort of remind me of Lila. But yeah, so this series has it all. I highly recommend it for people. I highly recommend it for fantasy lovers, but more so, even more so, I think this series could mean a lot to people that don't read a lot of fantasy, or don't know that they love fantasy yet, or are looking to get into fantasy. I think this trilogy is a great example of what fantasy is becoming, and what we're sort of moving towards, of just like this out of the box vivid, magical, fantastical worlds that aren't necessarily Tolkien. They're not necessarily Western. They're not necessarily just classical fantasy, I guess. This is the future of fantasy. Books like this, stories like this, and just a spirit like this. Yeah, and I don't know how I didn't have more praise for it the first time I read it, but looking back or rereading it, this trilogy is just a gift, and I please go read it. You won't regret it, I promise. I will say that book 1 maybe has a slow start. I don't feel like it has a slow start, but I know other people have felt that way, which is fine. But but if you have felt that way and you're having some trouble finishing it, finish it. I promise. Push through, and it is gonna be you're not gonna regret it. You're not gonna regret it. Just to wrap up, I want to talk about the Shades of Magic comics. E.V. Schwab has been working with Titan Comics. She's produced, I think there are only 12 issues, but it's Shades of Magic, The Steel Prince. And those comics are about Maxim Maresh, King Maxim. So it's Rye's father, Ryan Kell's father, back when he was a prince, when he was young prince, about Ryan Kell's age, in his early 20s. It's just more of the world. So if you read this and you love the world, and you just want to know more about Red London and about Arns and that whole deal, read it. It's beautiful. I don't know who the artist is. I think they use a couple of different people. There are 12 issues out so far. The art is just mind-blowing, and it just lets you keep going in the world and just learn more about that world, about Maxim, about a few of the other characters we see, minor characters that we see in the Shades of Magic trilogy. And that's by Titan Comics. They have about 12 issues, and I think they're going to do more. I'm not sure. And then you can also be on the lookout for more books by E.V. Schwab in this world, because she's supposed to be coming out with another trilogy based in the same world. I can't say for sure if it's based in Red London or not. I certainly hope so, or I certainly hope we get to be in Red London some, or that world, because that's definitely my favorite of the Londons. And I want to know so much more about like that whole empire, the history, the Essentosh, all of it. I want more. But that should be called the Threads of Power trilogy. We don't have an announcement on when that's coming out necessarily. I think we're going to learn a lot more about it this year in 2021. Maybe even have the first book towards the end of the year. Again, don't hold me to that. I'm not sure. I know the trilogy is Threads of Power. I don't know if that's the name of the first book or not. But be on the lookout, because that's not the end. That's not the last of this world. I'm personally hoping that it still involves some of our characters from this trilogy, because anyone that's read it would know that, Conjuring of Light left a lot of questions, especially about Kell, and about his origins. And I find it hard to believe that Schwab is not going to answer those for us eventually. It felt like a tease, and I'm here for it. Please give me more Kell, more Delilah, more Alucard, more Rye. God, give me more Rye. Maresh. I love him so much, and I'll take all that I can get. So that's my review of the Shades of Magic trilogy by E.V. Schwab. I'm not going to give it like a star rating or anything, because I feel like the review speaks for itself. I love this trilogy. I think everyone should read it. Go read it. Please. Have a great day.